So at this point, they all just had generic entries in terms of maps, and again, I didn't make them for the ones he was quote unquote making because well, he kept saying he had to fix up spawning grounds because he too made the same mistake. So, all fine with that. And so, spawning grounds and all that. So, I made all the ones for my maps that I was doing, and again, I was doing way more than he was, and I was completely fine with that. Still am, since I now have all of them to do now to myself. But, and then of course, like, school was ending for him, so he was getting all the hard tests and more assignments and more stuff to do with that. And not to mention, reminder, he broke up with Ellie and found another girlfriend. She went by the name of Jaden. And, like, she would come on very infrequently in the calls and play around and such, and all we did was continue to play Gmod, if even then, because I was getting tired of turning it on just so then we could play then, and there wasn't much we could really do because a lot of the maps that we encountered were really laggy, and I have a lot of assets that I use for sandbox stuff, and I wasn't really partial to disabling half of it, and like when I did, I then had to end up searching like through 20 assets that I really need in order to actually use them. Now, mind you, I only download models maps and models maps and player models. I don't download too many of the game mode-y stuff. I only did it once when he asked me to download the Pedo Bear stuff, and we laughed about that for a while. Never mind that his mind was slowly going more and more sexual, even after I'd already rejected him at this point. So it was getting a little annoying. He at one point referred himself, I never said anything like that to him, that I was sick of it at that point, but he specifically said that he wanted to stop it at one point, and I told him, well, if you feel like you want to stop it, then motivate yourself to do that, then stop. But obviously he didn't, so whatever. But school was ending and it was stressful, and like at this point in August, this was August again, we had yet another fallout because we were on a schedule and we had a call specifically to discuss that we would work on the project together at that point 5 p.m. his time, which was I think like 10 a.m. my time, and so I would alter my schedule to make it fit around that. So that worked fine. This was during the Flounder Heights fix-up saga. That was fine for a while, and then it got more and more difficult to keep up. I would wait until 10 a.m. and I would be there at 10 a.m. He wouldn't show up, or he wouldn't come online, or he would be off or not ready to work that day, or not doing so. And eventually, like, obviously it fell through, and that it just became a problem. And by this point, like, I was still making the basic map files for all the rest of it, so I was somewhat occupied, but eventually I ran out of things to do and our schedule was crap. So I then just sort of waited, and at this point it's like September 2018, and after the direct in September, it was like the day after, or like probably the afternoon of that, I don't exactly remember. It was very, very close to the Nintendo Direct of that month, and we then ended up discussing that he wasn't really going to be ready for some time. So was there going to be a time period, because I was done with all the basic map stuff, and at this point I needed to learn, like, because I needed to learn how could I do the collisions properly and the animations, which he still hadn't showed me properly beyond one video, which was more of a get hyped than how do you do this. So I asked him to give me a time period of when he was potentially ready. I was asking him myself, will you be ready, will you be good when school ends? I even, like, I don't remember how many times I asked that, but I do specifically remember asking, like, will you be more active when school ends? Because I've already ended school myself, and I know for a fact that your schedule is much different after school's ended. And for if school's just ended, you don't really feel like you want to just go back immediately, especially if the whole point of the project was that you were going to talk to your what he considered family at the point, because I was pretty much a sister to him at that point, even though I'm not. He would consistently refer to me as family, and this is backed up by the fact that early on, while he was loving me and all that, he would fall asleep in calls while the call was still running, mind you. He would fall asleep in these calls multiple times, mind you. He would fall asleep in these calls with me near him consistently. Pretty much every single time. Never mind the fact that he already was asking to do the whole shipping thing and wanted to... Like, we were literally pretty much, like, ship to bees. Never mind the fact he already had a girlfriend at this point. Like, at the point, like, he was... Before, during, and after, still calling me family. Because I didn't want our relationship to end just because, you know, I don't care about love. We are still friends. We still like each other very much. Let's keep it that way. And that's kind of why I like to derail a little bit. Like, that's kind of why I had a grudge against Ellie for a while, because when he broke up with her and went with someone else, she went nuts and couldn't even continue to have him as a friend. And here I am sitting here having rejected him myself. Yeah, I still want to hang around this guy because he's still an important friend, and friend is an important word when you actually care about someone for what they're actually good for. And since, you know, I'd sat in like 3 or so calls with the two of them at this point, I think I remember at one point she said in a call, I was working on Bluefin Depot's plants at the time because skate parks were crazy, and so every other map also works that way. I was working on Bluefin Depot's plants, and I was saying something like, I'm working on the layouts of the maps, and she's like, wow, you've got an amazing attention to detail. It's like one of the things I remember she said that was really... And she hung around in calls for like a good 2 weeks or something. So, it was important. So, I had a grudge against her because she wasn't able to see that he was still a good friend at that point. And she blatantly pushed me aside when she lied to me before that. I'd asked her, are you jealous of his other girlfriend, which I didn't say of his other girlfriend, but I pretty much implied that. Are you jealous of that in the whole love triangle? And she was, but she said no to me. So I had a very long-standing grudge against her for that. We've since talked and cleared that whole thing up now. But, like, I could, like, when I saw her whole love pentadecahedron thing with, like, how many videos was it? Of, not just, I saw the Team Downfall videos before I saw the Pick Surprise ones, but I saw them, and I pretty much thought I knew it so in the whole thing. When she pushed me aside with that, she was gonna end up in that direction, and pretty much. So, but like, he considered me family for up until that point, like, when he said he wasn't gonna be ready because of the whole school thing. He was, like, on that, for literally that entire time. During every call, during every, even with other people, for a while, even during the Ellie confrontation, he would not confront Heavy or Ellie or whatever unless I was there in the call. Not even if I actually contributed to the conversation. I just needed to be there in the call at all in order for him to feel comfortable. And he still had that comfort even after he had the girlfriend, because he would not get into social, like, he would not get into social confrontations with other people unless I was there. So we were very, very close. And I like, again, a reminder, at that point, I'm telling you to my friends and family. I'm telling stories about you to other people, and I'm specifically, my mind is on topics of you. So, like, he was at that point. And, like, I at that point, what kind of person would I be to just abandon that? So, I asked him, when is a time period that is good enough for you? And he then said December, which was when school was ending. So, which, I was like, well, couldn't you have just answered my question that I was telling you, since that's what I was asking in the first place? So, like, because he said, okay, I'll be ready around December, I'll be like, okay, I'll hold you to that. And I did. During that September talk, I talked to him and said, like, daylight saving time is going to change, so you should probably you should probably remind yourself of that. And he pinned the note, and then 2 weeks pass and that date rolls around, and I then contact him, even though we haven't talked for a good 2 weeks at this point. I know we haven't talked in like 2 weeks, but your reminder, I'm just reminding you that it's now changed and whatever. And he continued to not respond. At this point, I'm still, he's still busy with school, so I'm still assuming, okay, maybe he's just overloaded with work. Maybe maybe he's just so overloaded and so focused on his work he can't talk to me and will literally only be available in December. Okay then. So that's when I made all the Splatoon stage videos. That's when I made all of that to tell people this is how dynamicism in stages work, because at this point I'd learned all of the prop stuff, and even that, like, how to fix some of the issues in, like, Camp Triggerfish and whatever. And at that point, someone had come to me, they'd already come to me about the whole, we fixed skate park with the wrong skybox, and the gym, they're called bumpkers, the gym fitness bumpkers are missing, and that immediately ticked me off, because I want to be accurate to the game, guys. If we're going to be porting these from the game, they kind of need to be accurate. What's the point if it's not? So, yeah, that's kind of a big deal. So, he was annoyed that I wasn't having faith in him for being able to hold it to December. And, specifically mentioned that in the same chat log he mentioned he would be available in December. So, I then took that criticism to heart. So, I would have faith, because I had faith all this time. Why can't I have faith anymore? So I continued to have faith. I busied myself with the videos and all my other side projects for what would have been 2 months. It was actually 3 months, because it was mid-September when he said this to me, and I assumed a tentative date of mid-December, so that's like 3 months at that point. So I was getting ready to promote it, like, to do that, so then eventually I would be able to learn the maps and, like, learn the collisions, learn the animations, and then properly finish the maps. Then he posts a status in the group, the Squid Steam porting group. I'm not gonna port anymore for the source community. Keep in mind, he did not respond to me for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. Even when I did send him the DST thing, he didn't even respond to me at all. I noticed his activity was coming online quite often, because he was playing a bunch of games. And again, at this point, because I wanted to have faith, he told me to have faith, so I should, I assumed, oh, okay, maybe he's coming online because he finished his work for the day and he's just having the games to have a break. Okay, then that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But he never, before the chat of December, he had never given any indication that he was totally lost on motivation. Sure, we had a fallout over the schedule, but I specifically set out to improve that. I want to, like, he was watching some part of my Twitter in order to be inspired by the salmon run thing, to even ask me for the map in the first place, and to work on the game mode. So, because he didn't have the game. So, like, he asked me to have faith, so I wanted to have faith. So I assumed, like, by doing videos that were completely unrelated to the map project, he would see that I was having faith, that I was not whining for him, that I was specifically, that I was doing this because, he asked me to have faith, so I will have faith for my best friend. And what I haven't told most people after that is that was our last fallout and the end of it, because we don't talk to each other anymore. He broke his promise. He lied to me. He lied to me with the malicious intent because he told me to have faith and assumed a date of December would be completely fine. The malicious intent to push me aside, to ignore me, is what pushed me over the edge with him. I've given him multiple chances with these things. All of these were minor misunderstandings that, that they don't matter in the grander context of it, so whatever. But I will not stick with a friend who lies to me to that degree. Obviously, that's why I pushed Ellie aside for so long, because she lied to me. So, he isn't an exception in that. And what I haven't told a lot of other people after that is he lost motivation, obviously, and so never wants to do any of the things he promised that he said he was going to take from me, even after I kept pressing on him, is this okay? Are you okay in doing this? And he would repeatedly respond with, yes, I'm okay with doing this, in response to, let's do Walleye Warehouse, Camp Triggerfish, a Salmon Run game mode, Spawning Grounds, and all of the other 3 Salmon Run maps. On all of these issues, I would repeatedly question him, are you okay in doing this? But he obviously lost motivation, but beyond that, said that it was the community's reason for the reason I acted so passionate towards these maps, in which is wrong, and it's not the community's fault, but mine, because it's my own, because I made these stories and I want them to come to life. I'm angered that these ports that exist on the workshop, the ones that are there now from like Jonathan Fest and L Power, are improvements, especially John's. L Power still needs work, but in some areas, but not others. But the 3 maps, Inkopolis Plaza, Flounder Heights, and Walleye Warehouse at the time, it was completely my own that wanted to do that. However, mind you, he came to me in the first place. I'm gonna split these videos up because holy crap, this thing is so goddamn long. But like, I hope you realize, like, he still hadn't shown me the animations, which I'm still stuck on, and I still have to make some of them manually, as I've used some programs now to understand what skeletal animations in the game are, and let's just say most of the objects that are moved in the game, obviously the propeller platforms would fall under this category, but even stuff like Camp Triggerfish's walls, for example, even if they're only in Camp Triggerfish, or like Salt Spray Riggs' platforms, or even if, for example, an Octo Valley stage with moving platforms, even if the moving platform is relative to that stage only, like, for example, level 17, which is a Camp Triggerfish XP, which, level 17 in the first Splatoon, there's a platform that, I think it's one of the Octo Snipers is on it, and it moves side to side without player input. That doesn't count as an animation. That doesn't count, like, there is no animation file for it moving side to side. The game does that on its own, and I've only found that out more recently. So I would have to make them manually anyway, but I still didn't know how to make them at all, because all he'd shown me was a video of Salt Spray Rig of the platforms moving manually on their own, as a, here, we may do this eventually, which he never did, and still would continue to just play Gmod and not do the rest of it, and not even show me any of it, until literally 2018. So, yeah. It's the stupid grow up mentality that I'm an adult now, so I should only be interested in like like only I shouldn't have hobbies, essentially. I shouldn't have this hobby that I have here. And that, along with, the fact that he lied to me and specifically manipulated me, uh angered me to the point where I just don't want to be around him anymore. He is a user, pretty much. And I kept, like, to go back on the point that we were super friends, there was one point where he was being targeted for having told someone, apparently, um to go and die. And I remember he was concerned that day because apparently someone had hacked his account and, like, deleted it because it's not what he wanted to say. Everyone screen capped it, and there was, like, a whole exposed video made on him. Oh, look, this person in the community is bad because he literally said one thing to someone. Like, okay, fine. He, like, at that point, like, people were already going nuts over Heavy being exposed, and I'm like, guys, okay, fine, Heavy's bad, but, like, guys, he only said one thing. God. Do you guys know him personally like I do? Obviously, you wouldn't be this way. And, well, now I guess that video is kind of validated at this point, but, I stuck him through thick and thin when he was being, not just through that, but when he both, hooked up with and broke up with Ellie, because the community mauled both him and Ellie both times for both of those actions. And I even made a picture trying to tell people to lighten up, because they should be able to choose their own destinies and pathways. Granted, if you're not manipulating others in the process. But, like, there was no malicious intent at that time, so they were just being bullies. So I stuck him, even when Fission called his models, Fission implied that his models were crap by searching for a different Gmod porter at the time, and user got demotivated by that and couldn't work on the Salmonid port, which he was going to at one point, because I watched him collision up the Cohawk. He was futzing around with it in Blender for a good while, but he never finished it. And good thing too, because he was gonna heck up the collision for the steel eel, because its model normally has its mouth closed, and so he just collisioned its whole head as like an individual cube. Never mind the fact that its mouth can open in the game, and I even gave him a screenshot of it with its mouth open, and he's like, I don't think that's necessary. So I think you're all better off for not having him port the Salmonid like that, because they wouldn't be usable in any good fashion, in a sense. Like, porting them from SFM with them as effects is far more profitable than what he would have done with a Salmonid, if that cube steel eel is any indication. So, since that point, Flounder Heights was mostly finished. I just needed to put a few things on it. Like, I needed to give it a skybox, because the skybox he taught me how to do was really, really bad. He didn't even teach me a skybox, and I was supposed to just load the map up in Gary's mod without a skybox to see how it was, and maps in Gmod are supposed to have a skybox, because if you're gonna no draw the whole thing, props vanish. Wouldn't you know? The parameter in the source engine, which tells models to not render, actually causes the models to not render. Goodness! I wonder how that happened. So, because he told me to draw a giant no-draw cube in the middle of the map. I was showing this on stream, so he said, yep, that's totally fine, even though I would load it in Gmod and half the models were completely gone. But I was taught how to make a skybox then by the other guys, and I would then tell them about how, hey, Splatoon doesn't use the default skybox at all, especially not Splatoon 2's one, because Splatoon 2's one is Splatoon 1's is fine. It's just, it's a perfectly fine sky. Splatoon 2's though, it's just one of the skies from Splatoon 1, and I'm pretty sure this is like visible in someone's hacking video or whatever. It's just one of the default Splatoon 1 skies with the word default written in English, and this is why it's so hard for me to believe that the Nintendo of America made the file names in English for all of the models, because the texture of this has written in English the word default, and the textures would probably be made by the Japanese. So they probably know English if they can put the word default in English in the texture at all. So you probably don't want to use that skybox because it's just got the word default written all over the texture. So it's not really a sky. So no one really wants to use it. I even showed the default texture to the real user when I first found out about it, and I remember when I showed it, he wanted to draw over it the word default and kept laughing about it, that it was in a sky texture. So yeah. So I learned how to make a skybox then. In turn teaching them about the skybox and then helping them with their maps, which is kind of why Marco Mart and Snapper Canal are so good, because I helped clarify that there are more props that need to be placed in the stage, like the pole in the center of the stage in Snapper Canal, and in Marco Mart there's one of the jellies in the game is stuck in a thing on the side. Now remember in my Marco Mart video, or if you haven't watched that video, fine. It's animated because the jellyfish is trying to get out of the the fenced-in box. So that, because it's dynamic, because it moves, it's going to be a separate object because it has its own animation. The stage doesn't need to have its own animation, and if it does, it's usually separate, and it's usually something very small. Like the only animation in Inkopolis Square that is relevant to the Inkopolis Square model is a flag that's near the amiibo box that's leading off to the area where you can see Inkopolis Plaza from the square. Which actually the Inkopolis Plaza that you see in that is a flat polygon, or a flat couple of bunch of polygons. It's just a flat square with a texture on it, with the plaza on it, with the plaza tower on it. The plaza, Inkopolis Plaza, is not in Splatoon 2 because it's using the same name. The square is using the same name as it. So Inkopolis Square, then, the plaza polygon is in the middle of a black void. Sorry, but if I'm gonna have my illusion broken, you're gonna have your illusion broken too. So, yeah, I've since realized that there is an Inkopolis Square port in the works, and so I'm merging mine with it. So I'm not working on the square anymore. I'm working instead on the rest that I can do, that no one else has taken. Even if, say, the map is already ported elsewhere, a lot of the others aren't aware of the layout changes. So, I'm making them aware of that, and meanwhile, I'll just port the maps that I want with the layout changes, even if they're already done. So Kelp Dome is already ported, but that's the Splatoon 2 version, and there's also a bunch of props missing, and the Splatoon 1 version has a different skybox, and no side path on the grate, and same with Moray Towers. Moray Towers in Splatoon 2. Splatoon 1 doesn't have the side paths in one of the variations, and the other variation does have the side paths, but there's no... the metal boxes aren't inbuilt to the stage in that one. There's only like those, again, the bumpers, the fitness gym things scattered all over. The first version of Moray Towers, which was around for up until March 2016, didn't have side paths around the center platforms at all. They didn't exist ever. They were a separate object entirely because they only loaded in the ranked versions. Then around March 2016 they changed the Turf War variation to be the Splat Zones variation with the side paths and the bumpers and that, just no Splat Zones. So that's important. Got to keep the Splat Zones in check. Got to keep that in mind, that there was another variation for that, but the side paths themselves are also different. Like, they later changed now so that the side paths are now connected to the middle, but they used to not be connected to the middle, and they weren't inbuilt to the stage in Splatoon 1. They are in Splatoon 2 because obviously it changed. They renovated it, so then it changed that, but it was just in the patch notes. Did anybody read those? So, I've since begun working on the project alone. The project is not dead, but it is significantly changed since I'm now the sole person working on them with a few friends who pop in every once in a while, and I'm being generous with that. Octostomp and Skate Park are probably going to be next up because Octostomp had a couple of UV issues. Now, keep in mind, I mean UV issues in terms of the textures, like the actual textures, how they were supposed to be on the stage. There were UV issues that we hadn't really noticed before that point, which I had to go in and fix, and he somehow, in that first attempt, had fused like 15 models in one model, and then just called them 1 2 1 2 1 1 1 3 3 1, etc. And so that also meant the UVs of each model were conglomerated into this singular model, which was annoying. But I think I fixed that now. Octostomp is pretty much ready for release. I'm just waiting for pictures by other people, which I have not received a single one of. Skate Park also had a number of bugs related to no clipping, but those are since fixed. There's also now like a light that, like the stadium lights, that I've now added a texture to. I've had to make a custom edit since I've removed... The game uses a separate model with a built light, and then the game's engine takes it from there with like lighting from stadium lights and such, or spotlights. They just use a separate spotlight model for that, and then they just make it like invisible or whatever and make it emanate light, so then it sort of looks like a light and whatever. But I've made an effect for the stadium light where it looks like the stadium is emanating light. I've had to make a custom edit for that, but it works. So it's technically porting because it is lit up in the game, and you can edit it so then it can not be lit. It's just a parameter in the texture itself. So in the VMT, so it'll be fine. I want to get those out. Skatepark also had collision issues, and I know this because I had to spend an entire night fixing up decompiled collision because I have a blend file he gave me from long ago, but his QC's scaled up it in source, so I don't have, and they're already confusing anyway, I don't have the original collisions to work with, so I had to decompile them, and I had to spend an entire night recompiling. I only moved some of the faces in a different direction. I didn't delete any, but his is so poorly made apparently that the moment I even so much as moved some of the faces down because the tower was too high, Source freaked out about two-dimensional geometry again, and so I had to spend an entire night fixing his broken collision model, so that all of it retained the same proportions that he had, and now it works. Kind of. The Gmod version still has the right, and with the fixed collision, thankfully. But yeah, after that are ports of the Plaza in the works, the tutorial level, because that was originally ported. Oh yeah, there's another thing to go against Inkopolis Plaza's original port. Why does the Octo Valley manhole lead to the tutorial level? Okay, I get it, you go from the tutorial to Inkopolis, but why the Octo Valley manhole? Couldn't that have just been its own map? And especially given he put a random checkpoint in the middle of the tutorial map that wasn't there in the game, mind you. And I think he also blocked off the cafe, but I can't really verify that. And the collision around the tutorial UFO area is so wrong. It was awkward to work with for myself too, so fine, but he did not test it because there's a bit in it where it's close to one of the walls, but it's well off what the actual ground is. If you couldn't tell, it's a really bad port. So they're my current projects that are front-loaded, but to kind of give you another insight into the whole thing, I was trying to make... because, like, I was trying to do what I could do so then I didn't have to nag him endlessly about what we could do for this specific map. I wanted to make sure all of the maps were on equal footing. That's why I would turn on the game repeatedly around midnight for the scale for each of the maps already. And when the schedule was off and he was angry at me for you know, talking about the schedule and that the schedule was wrong and that we needed to wait to December in September, that was when I did all the map VMFs and did the textures for all of the other maps. I'm making sure that most of the maps are on equal footing. Because I haven't received anything to do with the Octostomp promos, people are busy, I get it. So that I'm taking that time now to work on the rest of it so that it can be done. Now, this is why I haven't released the maps that I'm currently working on, because inevitably, if I only release the Gmod versions, because I'm only good at the Gmod versions of them now, if I release the Gmod versions of these maps, granted half of them aren't even in completion, if I only did that, I'm inevitably going to receive comments like, when's the SFM version gonna come out? I mean, Inkopolis Plaza already receives those on a pretty consistent basis. Never mind the fact people have already given up. But it receives those on a pretty consistent basis. It did receive them for a while, so I don't think people are gonna forget that, you know, that a map in Gmod is gonna have... And granted, some of the maps I've made in Gmod, like, just using their Gmod parameters break in SFM or are extremely laggy in SFM, so even if I did release them, you couldn't just download them off that, and you would essentially be doing what I'm doing with decompiling the maps. You would have to decompile my stuff just to have that work, and I don't feel like that's appropriate. I feel like both should be released at the same time, so then nobody has to complain about anything except another map in the works that's supposed to be working, that you would want us to work